diving into this whole world of beneficial ownership regulation and specifically focusing on the Asia-Pacific region.
Okay.
You brought a ton of information for us. We've got this really detailed overview of a bunch of different countries in this region.
Yeah, it's a big area with a lot of different approaches, that's for sure.
And kind of a summary of some initial thoughts.
Right.
Our goal, I think, for this deep dive is really to, what are the main differences?
Exactly, yeah.
What are the things that maybe we wouldn't expect that are similar?
Total.
And then just, kind of paint a picture of how transparent company ownership really is in this whole region.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about, when we talk about beneficial ownership, we're talking about who actually owns and controls companies.
Right.
And it's a huge deal for understanding financial flows.
Right.
And really getting a grasp on how to tackle things like money laundering and other illicit activities.
Yeah. And for our listeners, we want to make this, kind of complicated topic understandable and insightful and not just like overwhelm you.
Right, for sure.
With information. So we'll be kind of highlighting the progress that different countries are making.
Absolutely.
And, what challenges they're still facing and why this all matters to everyone, not just to people in this region. So why don't we just jump right in?
Let's do it.
And start with China.
Sounds good, yeah. China's approach to beneficial ownership or, really revealing who's behind a company it's largely shaped by their anti-money laundering efforts.
Okay.
And what's interesting is, right off the bat, is that while they have these policies in place, the overall system is still considered to be kind of in its early stages.
So they recognize the need for it, but haven't fully,
it's not quite there yet.
Implemented it. Okay.
Right.
And our sources are saying there isn't really a central, publicly searchable, list of beneficial owners in China. And that the rules for reporting who the beneficial owner is tends to be less strict for private companies.
That's right, yeah.
Versus maybe publicly listed companies.
Exactly, yeah.
Is there any thought on why that is?
I think that's a really key question, and it often reflects kind of a balancing act between wanting to have this transparency, right, to combat things like financial crime.
Right.
But also potentially, wanting to minimize the administrative burden on smaller businesses.
Oh, interesting.
Or having concerns about data privacy.
Okay.
So there's this kind of push and pull.
I see.
But, they do have a beneficial ownership register under the State Administration for Market Regulation, SAMR.
Okay.
It was actually launched pretty recently in 2023.
Oh, wow.
But access to it is limited.
Okay.
So it's not publicly available. And we also see that the implementation of what's called a People with Significant Control, or a PSC register, is not yet very widespread. And just to clarify, a PSC register is designed to track individuals who have a lot of influence over a company.
All right.
Even if their actual shareholding might be below the threshold.
I see.
For being considered a beneficial owner.
Okay.
And then currently they don't have a register specifically for entities based outside of China.
So no foreign company?
Not a separate register, no.
Okay, got it.
And then in terms of the threshold for being a beneficial owner in China, it's 25%.
Okay.
So if you hold 25% or more of the shares or voting rights or have significant control over the company, you're considered a UBO.
So you're on their radar?
You're on the radar.
Okay, so that's China.
Right.
Kind of in the early stages still?
Yeah. I mean, it's evolving.
25% threshold.
Yeah.
Let's move over to Japan.
Okay, sounds good.
It sounds like there might be some differences there.
Definitely, yeah. Japan is a bit of a contrast to China. Their system's more developed.
Okay.
And it's more aligned with those global kind of anti-money laundering standards that we see. They have the Act on Prevention of Transfer of Criminal Proceeds.
Okay.
Which requires companies to disclose beneficial ownership information.
Okay.
And it's all collected in a central database.
So that's a difference right there.
Right there. Yeah, it's much more centralized.
Okay.
And you mentioned earlier the fully implemented PSC register in Japan.
Yeah.
So that does include both companies that are registered in Japan and companies that are based overseas that have significant interests in Japan.
Both?
Both, yeah. And what's particularly interesting is that Japan actively tracks overseas entities.
Oh, wow.
That have a significant level of control or ownership in Japanese businesses.
Okay.
So they're really trying to get a handle on who's ultimately behind those companies.
So they're not just looking internally?
Not at all.
Okay.
No, they're looking at the whole picture.
Got it.
They established the Japan Beneficial Ownership Registry under their national tax agency, the NTA, in 2022.
Okay. Fairly recent?
Fairly recent, yeah.
But access to that is restricted.
It is, yeah. So not everyone can just go in and look at it.
Right.
And similar to China, the threshold for being a beneficial owner in Japan is also 25%.
Okay, so same threshold.
Same threshold.
But seemingly like a more robust system.
Yeah, definitely a bit more thorough.
Okay, cool. So let's look at India's framework.
Okay.
Our sources call it evolving. So what does that tell us?
Well, evolving kind of suggests that it's a work in progress.
Right.
It's not quite a mature system yet.
Okay.
In India, beneficial ownership regulations fall under a couple of key pieces of legislation. The Companies Act and the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, or PMLA.
Okay.
And right now, the requirement to report beneficial ownership is mainly for companies listed on the stock exchange.
Okay.
So your publicly traded companies.
Right.
And for financial institutions.
So more heavily regulated industries?
Exactly. Those that are already under a lot of scrutiny.
Okay, makes sense. Is there a central registry where all this information is stored?
Not a single comprehensive one at the moment, no.
So it's kind of scattered.
It's a bit fragmented, yeah.
Yeah.
And the PSC register is only partially implemented.
Okay.
It mainly applies to publicly listed companies.
So again, more heavily regulated.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And similar to China, there's no specific register for entities based outside of India.
Okay, so still focused on kind of internal companies?
Primarily.
Yeah.
They did launch a BO register under their Ministry of Corporate Affairs back in 2018.
Okay.
But again, access is limited.
Okay.
Not everyone can see it.
All right.
And the beneficial ownership threshold, guess what? It's 25% again.
It's like the magic number.
Yeah, it's a common theme.
Okay.
So it seems like India is on a similar path to Japan in terms of that threshold.
Okay.
But maybe further behind in terms of how broad the system is and how easy it is to access the information.
Okay, so making progress.
Yeah, definitely moving in the right direction.
But some room for improvement.
For sure.
All right, let's keep moving.
Right.
Let's head south to Australia.
Okay, down under.
Which our guide calls an advanced system.
Right.
I'm really curious to see what sets them apart.
Well, Australia takes a big step towards transparency.
Okay.
They require companies to disclose individuals holding 25% or more control to their securities regulator, ASIC.
Right.
But here's the kicker. Basic company ownership information is actually publicly available.
Oh, wow.
Through the Australian Business Register, the ABR.
So anyone can just look that up?
Pretty much, yeah. It's online, easy to access.
So that's a huge step.
It's a big deal, yeah. Makes it much easier for anyone to see who's behind Australian businesses.
Does that public register also include, like, foreign entities?
It doesn't cover them comprehensively.
Okay.
So while the ABR is great for domestic companies, it doesn't include foreign entities in the same way.
Okay.
And they don't have a complete register of overseas entities either. However, they do have a fully implemented PSC register.
Okay.
So they're tracking those with significant control, regardless of direct ownership.
Got it.
And they also established the Australia Beneficial Ownership Register under ASIC just last year in 2024.
Wow, so very recent.
Very recent, yeah.
But access to that is restricted.
It is, yeah, not publicly available.
Okay.
And you probably won't be surprised to hear that the UBO threshold in Australia is also 25%.
It's like everyone's using the same playbook.
Yeah, it's becoming a bit of a pattern.
So public register's a plus.
Definitely.
But still some work to do maybe on that foreign ownership side of things.
It seems that way.
Okay, all right, let's hop over to South Korea.
Right.
Our guide highlights their stringent AML regulations.
Right.
So how does that actually play out?
So in South Korea, their strong anti-money laundering framework means that companies have to disclose their beneficial owners.
Okay.
Again, those with 25% or more control to the Financial Services Commission, the FSC.
Okay, so the disclosure's there.
It's there, yeah.
But is that information public?
Not in the same way as Australia's ABR, no.
Okay.
There's no public register of beneficial owners in South Korea.
Okay.
And there isn't a separate register for overseas entities either.
Okay.
They do, however, have a fully implemented PSC register.
Okay.
So they're tracking those with significant control, even if they don't meet that 25% ownership threshold.
Got it.
The South Korea Beneficial Ownership Register under the FSC was launched in 2021.
Okay.
But access is restricted.
Okay.
It's mainly for the authorities.
So strong AML, but not so much on public transparency.
That seems to be the case, yeah.
Okay, so yet again, 25% threshold. but different ways of collecting that information.
Different approach.
And who gets to see it?
Right, exactly.
All right, now let's zoom out a bit.
Okay.
Look at Southeast Asia as a whole.
All right, a bigger picture.
Which our guide says is a mixed landscape.
It is, yeah. It's very diverse.
So I'm guessing we're going to see even more variation.
When we look at Southeast Asia, the level of development and how they implement UBO regulations, it really varies from one country to the next.
Okay.
Let's take Singapore as an example.
Okay, good place to start.
They have pretty robust regulations, including a publicly accessible PSC register.
Okay.
Which, as we've talked about, is a good step towards transparency.
Yeah, definitely.
But even Singapore doesn't have a public register for overseas entities.
Okay.
And their UBO threshold is, surprise, surprise, 25%.
Of course.
So there's that common thread again.
Right. Okay, what about some of their neighbors, like Malaysia and Thailand?
Okay, good example. So in Malaysia, companies have to disclose their beneficial owners.
Okay.
But they don't have a public UBO register yet.
Okay.
Or a publicly accessible PSC register.
Okay.
And no requirement to report information on foreign entities.
Okay.
They did launch an electronic beneficial ownership system, or EBOS, in 2024.
So very recent.
Yeah, brand new.
But access is limited.
It is, yeah. It's mainly for competent authorities.
Correct.
The threshold there, you guessed it, 25%.
Okay. Keeping it consistent.
Sticking with the trend.
Okay. All right, Thailand.
All right, so Thailand also requires disclosure.
Okay.
But like Malaysia, they don't have a centralized public register or a PSC register.
Okay.
And they don't track foreign entities for UBO purposes.
Okay.
They launched a register back in 2020.
Okay.
But access is limited to the registrar, competent authorities, and what they call obliged entities.
So again, more restricted?
Yeah, not publicly available.
Okay.
And again, that 25% threshold.
Okay. So we're seeing kind of a pattern here.
Yeah, it's emerging. Disclosure's there, but public access is less common.
Okay. All right. Let's move to a couple more. Okay. Indonesia and Taiwan.
All right. So Indonesia requires disclosure of beneficial owners, mainly for anti-money laundering purposes.
Okay.
But they don't have a public register.
Okay.
Or a fully implemented PSC register. And there's no real comprehensive system for tracking foreign ownership.
Okay.
They did launch a directory of industrial companies in 2019.
Okay.
Which has broader access, including the general public.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, a little different.
Okay.
But it's not specifically a UBO register.
Okay.
The threshold, 25%, as you might expect.
Yeah, we're not even surprised anymore.
It's getting predictable.
Right. Okay. And Taiwan.
So Taiwan requires disclosure in certain sectors that are considered high risk.
Okay.
But like many of its neighbors, there's no centralized public register or a PSC register. And no register for overseas entities.
All right.
They launched a register in 2022.
Okay.
But access is restricted.
Okay.
And the UBO threshold, you know it, 25%.
Always 25%.
Always 25%.
Okay. All right. Now we've got a few more in this region.
All right, shoot.
Philippines, Bangladesh, and Vietnam.
Okay. So the Philippines requires disclosure.
Okay.
But they don't have a fully implemented PSC register or a public UBO register. And there's limited tracking of foreign entities.
Okay.
However, they did launch something called the PHEITI Beneficial Ownership Registry in 2020.
Okay.
And this one actually has general public access.
Oh, wow. A little different.
Yeah, kind of an exception.
Yeah.
The threshold, you guessed it, 25%.
Yeah, there it is.
All right. Bangladesh, they require disclosure.
Yeah.
But there's no central or public register.
Okay.
No specific reporting for foreign entities.
Right.
They launched a register in 2022 with restricted access and the threshold 25%.
Okay.
And lastly, Vietnam, they actually have a slightly lower threshold requiring disclosure for those holding 10% or more ownership.
Oh, okay. So a little lower.
Yeah, bit of an outlier.
Right.
But like many others in the region, they don't have a centralized public register
Okay.
or a PSC register.
Okay.
And no specific tracking of foreign entities.
Right.
They launched a register in 2020, but access is limited.
Okay, so it seems like across Southeast Asia, it's really fragmented.
It's a patchwork, yeah.
Some movement towards having registers.
Definitely, yeah.
But not always accessible.
Right, and sometimes limited in the information they contain.
Okay, now our guide mentions kind of a notable exception in the Asia-Pacific, Hong Kong.
Right, yeah, Hong Kong's a bit different.
So what makes them stand out?
Well, Hong Kong has a much more robust and transparent system.
Okay.
They have a publicly accessible PSC register, which they call the Significant Controllers Register.
Okay.
And importantly, they also have a register for overseas entities.
So they're really looking at that foreign ownership piece.
Absolutely, yeah. They're trying to get the full picture.
Okay.
Their threshold for beneficial ownership is 25%.
Okay, back to the 25.
Yeah, it's a popular number.
All right.
And their register was launched back in 2018.
Okay.
With pretty broad access.
Okay, so they seem to be a leader.
I'd say so, yeah.
In this region.
They're definitely ahead of the curve.
Okay, so looking at this whole region, what are some of the major trends and challenges that stand out to you?
So many, yeah. But I think a few key things. Firstly, just the sheer variety of approaches.
Right.
And it's all over the place.
Yeah.
You have these more developed systems like in Japan, Australia, and Hong Kong, while lots of other countries are still, kind of figuring it out.
Right.
Or they're facing challenges with making the information accessible.
So that seems to be a big one.
Yeah, public access is a big hurdle. And so it's this whole thing of tracking the beneficial owners of foreign entities.
Right, because it's not just about what's happening internally.
Exactly. It's about understanding those international connections.
Right. It's a global world.
It is, yeah. And money flows across borders.
Definitely.
And then you have this diversity in how mature the regulations are.
Right.
And what the priorities seem to be.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Right. And it highlights how complex it is to try to establish consistent standards across such a diverse region.
So for our listeners, they're hearing all of this. What are the key takeaways?
Well, I think the Asia-Pacific is a fascinating case study in this global effort to increase transparency around who owns and controls companies. And you can see how different countries are balancing that need for transparency, which is so important for fighting financial crime, with other priorities like protecting individual privacy and making sure their business environment is competitive.
Right. So there's a lot of factors at play.
Lots of things to consider.
Right.
And while some countries are making huge strides towards open registers and more comprehensive tracking, many are still figuring out the practicalities of setting these systems up and making sure they actually work.
Right.
So the different levels of progress show us that this is a journey. It's ongoing.
Yeah.
It's evolving.
It's not a quick fix.
Not at all.
And it's global.
It's a global issue, for sure.
Yeah, and the fact that we're seeing such different approaches in such an interconnected region, it really emphasizes this international effort to develop more consistent standards.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because illicit activities, they don't care about borders.
You don't. They cross them easily.
But we need to be able to keep up.
Exactly. We need to be one step ahead.
Absolutely.
And for you, the listener, here's a thought. Given how interconnected the global economy is, how do you think these differences in transparency actually impact international efforts to combat financial crime?
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. And to ensure that we have fair markets.
Yeah.
What future developments do you think we might see in this landscape as international norms continue to develop and as countries learn from each other?
Right, because there's a lot we can learn from each other.
Absolutely, both from the successes and the challenges in implementing these regulations.
Definitely.
I mean, the Asia-Pacific region with all its different approaches. It's really a valuable window into the future of financial transparency.
It really is, yeah.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Absolutely. This was a really interesting one.
It was always fascinating to see how this is all playing out.
Definitely. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next time.